Welcome to footballgameplan.com, where football makes sense. I'm Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook, and now that all of the film has been watched and the grades are finalized, it's time to break down the 2019 NFL Draft prospect rankings. Before we dive into the prospect rankings video, let's take a look at how we go about grading these guys on film.
For the skill positions, we take a look at a prospect's best and worst games statistically and the best matchup before we finalize his film grade. And from there, the player is assigned a grade on a 100-point scale. We don't believe in the term backup per se. If you're the NFL, you're one of the best players at your position, so we consider you a starter in waiting, or at least that's how I would look at it if I'm a GM or a head coach. So without further ado, let's dive into the video with our number one graded prospect at the position. And this year's top quarterback is Ohio State's Dewayne Haskins. The 6'3", 220-pound signal caller put together a remarkable season for the Buckeyes, tossing 50 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions at 9.1 yards an attempt, completing 70% of his passes in the process. What stood out to me about his game was how consistently decisive he was in throwing the football. Remember, indecisive passes go back the other way or fall incomplete. Haskins was able to navigate through a tough schedule, getting better each and every week in his first year as a starter. His top trait is his pinpoint accuracy and placement. He's outstanding in that area, always giving his receiver a chance to run after the catch. With his grade, if we're comparing it to last year's class, he would have graded out above Lamar Jackson, who led his team to the playoffs as a rookie starter of only 7 games as QB1. Don't let people tell you any differently. Haskins is a premier quarterback prospect that will be a day one impact player the moment he hits the field. The reigning Heisman Trophy winner Kyler Murray out of Oklahoma graded out as my QB2. Murray reminds me a lot of NC State Russell Wilson. Wilson was a similar type player there before going to Wisconsin to smooth out his game. And if you follow Football Game Plan since 2007, which you should, you already know our saying that size is not a skill. Murray's athleticism and ability to accurately hit passes in the intermediate to deep area of the field makes him a player that makes it an 11-on-11 game, while also putting the secondary in a bind because he's able to extend and fire deep down the field accurately. Wherever he goes, it'll be important for the head coach and the OC to coach to his skill set and not to try and make him something that he's not. Here's a look at the rest of the top 10. Will Grier out of West Virginia has a lot of the same attributes that Cleveland Browns quarterback Baker Mayfield has. I think he's being a bit underrated at this point. He'll be fine, in my opinion. Drew Lock out of Missouri made tremendous strides this year for the Tigers situationally, which is big for him. That's huge because it shows that he's trekking in the right direction as a quarterback. His game is very similar to the Oakland Raiders QB Derek Carr. Tyree Jackson out of Buffalo is a toolsy guy that still has upside left in his game. Working through his mechanics is where he'll have to spend a good bit of his time as a rookie. And I think BYU quarterback Tanner Mangum is a sleeper in this class. Mangum dealt with injuries and a philosophy change with the Cougars, but when you watch him play, you see a path for him to have success consistently as an NFL quarterback, especially in an offense that puts the quarterback on the move. He's a very accurate passer. He's a very accurate passer in my opinion in that regard. I think his best football is ahead of him. Now let's take a look at some of the small school guys that made the top 10, starting up north in Canada with Michael O'Connor out of the University of British Columbia. O'Connor is a former Penn State transfer who led the T-Birds to a national championship in his first season as their starting quarterback. He's the top CFL draft prospect at the position also. What stood out to me back in May at the East-West Bowl was how strong and accurate of an arm that he has. O'Connor can put the ball wherever he wants on the field. He's good enough to be a first-round pick in the CFL and get into an NFL camp and make the 53, in my opinion. He's going to be a fantastic pro player in whatever league he lands in. Taryn Christian out of South Dakota State reminds me a lot of the Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott. He's athletic, he's a gamer, and an overall good decision maker with the football. He's been one of the few quarterbacks who's been able to have success against North Dakota State, and he did big things this year without his NFL perimeter targets in tight end Dallas Goedert, who plays for the Eagles, and wide receiver Jake Wieneke, who had a cup of coffee with the Minnesota Vikings. Christian does a great job in the situational football department and is coming off of a strong week of work at the College Gridiron Showcase. Another prospect from that same All-Star event was Abdullah Golic from Central Connecticut State. He's got a game that's very similar to Joe Flacco when he came out of Delaware. He can really drive the ball well over the middle of the field and down the sidelines into tight windows. He really didn't throw much at Central Connecticut State, but when they needed him to make plays, he was able to deliver for the Blue Devils. I think his best football is ahead of him as well, and he's best off of play action and does a great job of throwing receivers open. Easton Stick was one of the more highly decorated prospects in his draft class coming out of the great North Dakota State Bison program. Stick is one of the more efficient passers in the draft class and a top-notch athlete to boot. I hate to use the term winner and gamer once again, but that aptly describes his game if you really look at it. You can't fake live action in practice, and when the bright lights are on, which they were throughout his entire collegiate career, as North Dakota State was everybody's Super Bowl, Stick was able to answer the call each and every time. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes in the NFL, because he's going to make a case to be a team's QB2 as a rookie. I'm a big fan of his game. Moving on to prospects 11 through 20, you talk about a list that features a ton of quote-unquote winners like Brett Rippon of Boise State, Trace McSorley of Penn State, and Amir Hall of Bowie State, who just won his second consecutive Black College National Player of the Year award. All three guys are strong QB2s with starter potential. I don't think a lot of people paid attention to the QBing job of two West Coast guys and what they did out there this past season, and Manny Wilkins of Arizona State and Marcus McMarion of Fresno State. Both guys are situationally good quarterbacks that have the athleticism to make a defense pay. Wilkins has a live arm, able to deliver the football on a rope consistently anywhere he wants to on a field. A.G. Patterson of New Haven is stylistically similar to Wilkins coming out of that program, and Chris Merchant is another Canadian prospect that's on some radars in the NFL because of his stellar play. He was a former University of Buffalo transfer that went up north and did great things for the Mustangs of Western University. Both Daniel Jones of Duke and Dominique Harris of Benedict are toolsy guys that still have some refinement left to do in their game, but both are good prospects nonetheless. And when you look at prospects that made a significant jump from one year to the next, you have to mention John Lovett of Princeton. In 2016, I called him the FCS Tim Tebow because of his rushing exploits, rushing for 20 touchdowns that year while throwing for 10 touchdowns in spot duty in the platoon quarterback system at Princeton. He missed all of 2017 with an injury, and this year he was a full-time starter at quarterback and helped spearhead one of the most explosive offenses in the FCS, averaging just about 50 points a game. We wanted to see him develop as a passer, and he did just that. Lovett was able to showcase the intermediate and deep ball accuracy that we were looking for in this game, completing 66% of his passes, tossing 18 touchdowns to only 3 picks. He still led the team in rushing with nearly 900 yards on the ground and 13 rushing touchdowns. I know I compared Taron Christian to Dak Prescott, but that's the Dallas Cowboys version. Lovett reminds me of the Mississippi State Prescott, so it will be interesting to see how he continues to develop his game moving forward. He's another winner coming off of a perfect 10-0 season and an Ivy League championship this year at Princeton. As we check out prospects 21 through 30, Taylor Cornelius of Oklahoma State and Gunnar Minshew of Washington State threw for a ton of yards this year, and they were able to cap off their careers in postseason All-Star games. Ryan Finley and Jake Browning logged a lot of starts at NC State and Washington respectively, and I think a guy like Jawan Lawson is just scratching the surface of what he could develop into as a pro. The same can be said for Drake's Grant Kramer. He's coming off of a solid season, one in which he nearly pulled off the upset against Iowa State at the end of the regular season. Kramer has what I like in quarterbacks: short memory and trusts his guys to make plays. He's going to give his receivers a chance to make a play on the ball and quickly overcomes any mistakes that he makes to make the right play the next time. I believe Kramer is a prospect that has a ton of growth left in his game. Devlin Hodges of Stanford broke Steve Aaron McNair's FCS passing record this season en route to winning the Walter Payton Award, which is the FCS equivalent to the Heisman Trophy. One game I watched was a Florida State game in which he was in a tight one until the fourth quarter. Hodges performed well in that one and also against Mississippi State, I want to say a few years ago. One thing's for sure, the 6'1", 210-pound signal caller doesn't lack confidence within his game nor in his throws that he's able to make out there on a football field. He's a productive player that understands coverages and that is going to take him a very long way as a pro. I ended up grading 75 quarterbacks this year, which speaks to how deep the class was, in my opinion, especially at the small college levels. As we move on to prospects 31 through 40, Brad Mays of Lehigh and James Taberry of McNeese State played in the disadvantageous situations this year, but both guys still have the raw talent that made them prospects to watch coming into this season. Mays can really throw the heck out of the football, and I'm a big fan of how he competes. Bart Williams is his name to know. He's battled some injuries, but has a good all-around game that teams covet. Vincent Espinosa of Lincoln University of Pennsylvania has a certain moxie about his game to go along with tremendous athleticism to make him a true dual threat at the position. Espinosa's situational football was something that stood out consistently on film and during the FCS and Tropical Bowl All-Star Game practices. He's got the work-withable skills that can be developed if a team is willing to take the time to help him smooth out his game. What's good about him, though, is that he's a sponge, a football junkie, so I would expect him to find a way to continue to grow his game regardless. Some good athletes here on the list as Eric Dungey and Nick Fitzgerald are similar types of prospects in my opinion. Health is going to be the key for Dungey moving forward. Fitzgerald didn't take the next step as a senior in Joe Moorhead's offense down there at Mississippi State. You love the athleticism and his ability to take over a game in that regard, but the rest of his game has to get up to speed. Prospects 51 through 60 are guys that I think are great developmental prospects that have the proverbial high ceilings that folks like to say. Case in point would be three guys in CJ Collins, Sam Castronova, and Colin McGovern. All three guys are coming from smaller programs, and they put together a lot of good tape out there on film with a ton of room for growth left in their game. And as we get to the back end of our rankings, still a ton of good talent out there at the position. Hayden Balserman of Shenandoah was outstanding on film, especially in the short to intermediate area. Jalen Mcclendon of Baylor played in the NFLPA game and has a ton of buzz within the scouting community. He hasn't played a lot of football per se, but he has the passing traits and athleticism that a team will definitely take a chance on this upcoming spring. And rounding out the rankings with 71 through 75, I thought Glenn Culette of Texas Southern had a really good FCS Bowl week of work and throws a great deep ball. He's very Jeff Blake-like in that regard.
So that's a wrap here from the Football Game Plan Studios. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook. Be sure to follow me on all of my social media accounts. And don't forget to check out and subscribe on iTunes to Football Game Plan Podcast. We can find our Scout Team podcast, which has a lot of 2019 NFL Draft prospect interviews. And also be sure to subscribe on YouTube to the Football Game Plan Network located at youtube.com/footballgameplan.